How do lease option agreements work? Lease options are a great way to acquire property without huge amounts of capital outlay when you find the right deals. My name is Ryan from Luke Holmes Academy, teaching entrepreneurs just like you how to acquire property fast. Firstly, who would be open to lease options? Let's take a quick look and see what the profile would be that we can find lease option deals from. So number one for me is inherited. People inherit property all the time, yet necessarily they do not want to be landlords. They quite often get these properties passed down to them, but at the same time they're not savvy investors, so they don't want to be using stocks and shares and selling the asset off and making their money work with stocks and shares. They also quite often are maybe on low paying jobs, or they might not have more than a month's salary in their bank account, so they don't want the risk of boilers going or maintenance, or quite frankly a lot of people just don't want tenant hassle. They don't want the headache of being a landlord. So there are a lot of people who inherit property, they still want to keep the asset, but they don't want all the running of the property that comes with it, and that's where we can step in. Number two, you've got people that are struggling to run these properties, make these properties work, make them pay the bills, pay the mortgages, and ultimately they just want out. So again, they might not want to release the equity in the property, but they just want out of the whole headache and the whole hassle. Finally, we have the people with the stuck in the mortgages. So the mortgage maybe has been acquired at a higher rate. Typically, you'll find these people have bought properties around 2004 to 2007, but they're stuck in a mortgage. They owe more than what the property's worth. The property's gone down in value, and ultimately they want to move on, but they can't move on. So a lease option works great for them because it gives them that freedom to be able to move on, but also it gives them that freedom to be able to move on. We take ownership of the property, we run the maintenance, we run the costs, we run the mortgage payments, and then they move forward with their journey. They're not going to get any money out of the property anyway, so what we do is we obviously agree a delayed sale at a point in the future where we think that the property is going to be worth the amount that they probably owe on their mortgage, and at that point we then take ownership of the property. But for now, until that point, we then run the property as though it's ours. For them, it's a great solution. It allows them to move on with the comfort that they know the mortgage is going to be paid. They're never going to have voids. Again, these type of people don't necessarily want to be landlords, so you could say, well, why don't they just rent the property themselves? A lot of people do not want to be landlords. A lot of people do not want the headache and hassle of being a landlord. So we have to understand that there are these opportunities out there for us, because we do want to run properties, we do want to make money out of properties, and there's plenty of people that don't. How do they work? In essence, what we do is we agree a purchase price. Okay, so we agree a purchase price at the beginning of the sale. Now that agreed purchase price will be set for a certain amount of time, so you also have a time. So number one is we agree a purchase price. Number two is the time on the contract. So this typically is around 5 but can be up to 10 years or more, so it just depends when we think the market value is going to be there for that contract. When we feel like, if, for example, if the house is worth 55 grand now and they owe 65 grand on their mortgage, when do we think that property is going to be worth 65 grand? Because ultimately we're probably going to put a mortgage on it, so we're going to need to get a valuer to value that property up at 65 grand. So we have to make sure that it's then. So we kind of use our due diligence and the research and the knowledge that we've got to be able to predict when that's going to happen. Obviously we're only taking the option to buy, so it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to buy the property, but I'm a firm believer that if you commit on something, you should follow through. So I would only get into a lease option deal if I was genuinely going to purchase that property at some point in the future based on the contracted term. Number three, you agree a rent. For me, for the deals I've done, I typically mean that's the mortgage payment, so I take over the mortgage payment. But if they don't have a mortgage, if they've inherited a property and there's no mortgage on it, then they might just want a small consideration fee, a small rental fee up front every month for the security, knowing that they're getting something out of the deal at least. But most of the time, they will have a mortgage on it and they're comfortable with the mortgage being paid. And this is where lease options can work for all strategies, because if you're just paying a mortgage payment, you can then single let it. You don't have to be super renting it to make your money out of the deal. You're going to take over the maintenance. So the maintenance is the next part of the agreement, and unlike a rent-to-rent agreement where the landlord would still have responsibility for things like the boiler and the roof and things like that, in a lease options agreement you are effectively, I mean each lease option is different, but in the majority of them, the maintenance falls solely on you. You're going to run this property as though it's your own. You're going to run it as though you've bought it. You know, I got into a lease option, the boiler went 6 weeks later. You know, I had to stump up that cost to get it done because that was what I put in the agreement. Unfortunate, but at the same time, I fully intend to purchase that property in, it'll be about 3 years time now, and then, you know, that's my property anyway. So I've only enhanced my own property, and that's the good thing with lease options versus rent to rent is, you know, if you're confident with the figures and you're getting into these deals, you do treat them as though your own, and therefore they are, you know, you're adding value to your own asset there. Now, a couple of other things that we need to consider with lease option is what we call a consideration fee. So to make the agreement binding, we have to have a consideration fee, and that can be anything from £1. But we do have to have a consideration fee to make the contract move forward. And then obviously the next thing is the legal agreement. Now, you would not want to get into a lease option without getting this done by a solicitor, and I do see it all the time, people saying, can someone send me a copy of that lease agreements that they've done so they can copy it? I think that's a huge mistake. Each lease agreement is totally different, the parties involved are totally different, so for the sake of £250 to £500, get the right legal structure put in place, get the right contract put in place. It protects both parties, it cements the trust in the deal, and it's just an absolute must. There's no question on that one. So finally, what we then do is look at how do we rent these properties. I kind of touched based on it before, but you've kind of got three options. So your options are, one is just a single let. Now, because we're only paying the mortgage on it, we can just single let them. That's not a problem at all. Number two, we could HMO them or mini-mo them, depending on the structure and depending on the size of the property. And then finally, obviously we could run them as serviced accommodation. Now, for me, I would always look to do one of these strategies, because obviously they're the super rent strategies, and they are much more profitable when done right. And if you're super renting a lease option where maybe you're only paying the mortgage payment, then your net profit each month is going to be vastly greater than if you were just a single let. However, not all areas and not all properties obviously work for super rents, so you've got to maybe just look at a single let option. And if you can make, you know, £200-400 a month out of your single lets, well, that's all you would do on your owned assets anyway as a single let, so for the majority of places in the UK. So, you know, you're going to be making some good return on that anyway. Now, bit of a transformation. A lease option actually transformed my whole property journey. It was a lease option that got me involved with Airbnb, and now I've got obviously a very large Airbnb business, and you know, it's pushed us into other super rent strategies. It's given us the cash flow and the ability to build assets and everything in between. But it was a lease option that actually got me there, because I took on a lease option. I did the due diligence right. I probably overspent a bit on the refurbishment, and but I couldn't get it rented. For whatever reason, I just couldn't seem to get this property rented. We had 7 or 8 viewings through the door, and not one of them wanted to take it. And for me, that's alarm bells ringing. You should be renting a property at that stage by the time you've had that many people come through the door. So I was speaking to a friend of mine, and he was mentioning what he did with one of his flats, and I didn't even know what Airbnb was at the time. So I went deep dive, you know, looked at it quickly, and then I just, you know, straight over to IKEA, spent about £1,500 on furniture, set this thing up, took a few iPhone pictures, and boom, away we went. Bookings, I think I had £3.5 worth of bookings in the first 5 days, and it just, you know, was the perfect location for Airbnb, for serviced accommodation. And you know, there was probably a bit of luck involved in that, because I didn't really know how to research serviced accommodation areas at the time. I just took a chance on it, went with my gut instinct, and it really paid off. And then from that, I decided I wanted to turn all my single lets in the right locations into serviced accommodation units, because I could see how much more profit was generated from the venture. So it was a lease option that actually got me to where my serviced accommodation portfolio is today. So, you know, it's a great strategy. It works very well. They can be quite difficult to find, so you need to know the ins and outs of how to find them, the right people, the right prospecting, the right messages to send out there. how to research Rightmove and look at the right signals to find these deals. But there's plenty of these deals out there, and when you understand the basis of them and how they work, and be able to get that over to a potential landlord, potential vendor, because most of the people getting into lease options might not be that savvy in terms of investment, in terms of property. Their property knowledge is possibly not going to be as great as yours, or we tend to live in this property bubble where we think everybody knows about property and everybody knows all these strategies and R2Rs and HMOs, and people just understand what that is, and they don't. The type of people that are going to be giving you these deals, you're going to have to explain in layman terms how this agreement works, how the security works for them, how it's all panned out, how they can move on with their life, and ultimately how you're going to solve their problems. And if you do that, you will pick up these type of deals. So that's how lease options work in brief. Obviously there's a lot more to it. If you want to continue your property knowledge journey, then obviously subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly putting the information out there. I'm doing videos every single day trying to help you guys out. If you want to take your journey to the next level, jump on board my mentor program. Just head over to nextlevelpropertyinvesting.com and book a call with me, and we can have a chat. That is the quickest way to accelerate your property growth. It's a 3-month program, and it's proven to get results all over the UK. For now, take care.